So as we get started, as it relates to discussion with Dr. King, the focus of the discussion, or what we're going to attempt to do in this panel, is to have discourse around where King might be in the 21st century, and really focusing in two areas. The first area being poverty, and how King might use some of the tools available to us in the 21st century to address the issue of poverty, not only locally and domestically, but also potentially globally. And then secondarily, we will look at how King might use things like technology and even potentially energy to address and to begin to deal with areas of oppression in the 21st century. And then we'll talk about technology and social media a little bit as well, assuming that we have time. But as we get started, it's just a joy to be here with this panel. We have a wondrous panel this morning. I want to start off by introducing the panel. To my furthest left is Reverend Joshua Dubois. Joshua is the former head of the Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships in the Executive Office of the President of the United States. And Joshua has recently written a book that talks about his experience with the President and the daily devotionals that the President experienced. I invite you all to take advantage of that book. He signed a copy for me, and I'm so excited I can't wait to get into reading it later on. Next to Joshua and between us is the President of Wesley Theological Seminary, my alma mater, where I did my Master's of Divinity and my Doctorate in Theology, and one of my mentors, Dr. David McAllister Wilson. To my right is Reverend Brenda Girton Mitchell. She is in the Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships with the U.S. Department of Education, and also one of my mentors. And then lastly, probably my spiritual father in the ministry, or not probably, he is Dr. William B. McLean. He is a retired professor emeritus for the Elizabeth Joyce of Preaching position at the Wesley Theological Seminary. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. So let's get into it. When we think about Dr. King, and we think about where things ended off with Dr. King, more specifically the Poor People's Campaign, where he was not only addressing that, but he was addressing that as opposed to the challenges faced with the Vietnam War at the time and the distraction. If we think back and we remember, during that period, we had started off the early 60s with the war on poverty. And that war on poverty, there were programs put out that remained beneficial for decades. But post that, there was the war in Vietnam was a definite distraction to resources that were received as it relates to the war on poverty. King was probably the many mechanisms and tools that he used, not only in organizing but in execution, were some of the first approaches that we had seen as it relates to social media today and the technology implementation of that. So I want to open up to the panel to just ask each one of the panelists to deal with an initial reflection of how King might approach poverty today. Some of the panelists, Dr. McLean, walked directly with Dr. Martin Luther King, and really understood how he might think from more of a personal perspective, and others from more of a historical perspective. Let me open it up with Dr. McLean.
Thank you. Good morning. It's such a joy to be here and to see all of you. Martin King would be just glowing if he saw this gathering this morning. I think that we have to, somebody earlier reminded me to go back to 1964 and how important 1964 was, and how leading up to 65 and the voting rights bill that was passed and signed in the next year. I think if Martin were alive today, he would make good use of all this technology that we have. It's amazing to me that we were able to amass as many people as we were, given the communication that we had. But if we had email and we had Instagram, is that what y'all call it? And tweet and Dr. Weston, what was it? Facebook. If just imagine the Poor People's Campaign and that kind of communication across this nation. Man, oh live, woman, oh live. What a gathering we would have had in Washington, D.C. All I can think of right now is, goodness knows he would have made great use. And I'm so delighted to be on Restore Together's board while, as we consider ways that we can use technology to improve the lives of our people around the world, not just in the United States, but around the world. Poverty is an issue around the world. And we've got this amazing ability to communicate information sharing around the world. He would just be delighted to be able to use these modern methods and this modern technology that we have to spread the word. We may have already accomplished the beloved community if we had had this kind of communication.
Other thoughts?
Well, good morning. I believe that we would have a digital march on Washington.
Amen.
And it would start pressing the issue of cradle to career learning. It would start by reminding us that we have to have a culture of educational excellence and how we have to instill the desire to learn in our children from the earliest time possible so that we don't even end up with the gaps. And that we are, doing, as we said, we're not just feeding people, but we're teaching people how to take care of themselves. We're taking the Matthew 25 imperative to another place. That if we added the things that we do for people, we would add into that if I was uneducated, you would educate me. And so I think he would just start a whole new cry out for the structural changes that are impacted by educating our young people as early as they can. While we're taking care of some of the immediate needs, at the same time, we'd be taking a long-term look at how we keep our children from even needing to have a gap closed, because the gap would never be allowed to form. And we know that education is one of the reasons that poverty becomes so persistent, because people don't have the ability to help themselves as much economically as they could if they were empowered early on. So that's one of the things I think he would say.
I'd say amen to both my esteemed mentor, Dr. McLean, and my former board member, Brenda. But I want to push it a little bit further. I'm so pleased to be on the board of Restore Together because I think this is an organization that really can start to take advantage of the networking that the technology makes possible. Yes. However, I think we also have to recognize the limitation and where we push it next. Let me give you two examples of the limitation. Social media has been credited with starting or helping to start the Arab Spring. But now the research shows it has not been able to continue it. Social media has rightly been credited with a lot of why President Obama is in the White House after '08, because it helped to mobilize a generation to vote. That generation has not signed up for health care. Tip O'Neill said all politics is local. I think what we have to do in our organization and in other organizations is ask, what can the social media tool do to start to give a cry, but then how can that be localized? Where are we going to act strategically beyond the networking?
I think that's exactly right. I think Dr. King would be focused less on Washington and more on restoring a sense of empathy around the country. I think he would be the first one to go into red states and Tea Party districts and remind people that we are all in this together. We're all connected. And I think he'd have a unique ability to do that. If we're talking about Dr. King, just a bit of an aside, by the way, we have to acknowledge a legend in our midst, in addition to Dr. McLean, Miss Willie Pearl,
Amen.
Who typed up the letter from the Birmingham jail that was smuggled out of the jail, Dr. King's letter, on a piece of toilet paper. Is that right, Miss Pearl?
Newspaper print.
In newspaper print,
yes.
And all of the above.
Whatever you can write on.
So let's give her a round of applause. And finally, Dr. Hutchinson, if you don't mind, Reverend Joseph Lowry related a story to me about the first time Dr. King actually accidentally encountered global poverty as opposed to poverty here in the United States. It was a mistake. He didn't mean to encounter this. It was he was on vacation. He and Coretta Scott King were not able to take a honeymoon right after they got married. They spent the first night of their marriage sleeping above a funeral parlor, which Coretta reminded him about for the next couple of years and said, "Hey, we need a vacation at some point." And so once they got through the Montgomery bus boycott, she had arranged for them to travel to Mexico to spend 2 weeks on vacation there. And she was all excited about going and laying out on the beach and finally getting some rest after that very difficult couple years in Alabama. And he got there and saw the abject poverty that was around him in Mexico and couldn't even have a good time because he saw what people were going through. And that was the first time that he had an experience with global poverty. So I do think it's that sense of empathy. I think he would focus on reminding people in the United States that we are connected in this wonderful way across borders and across cultures with people who are suffering around the globe.
Amen.
Yeah.
And further, I guess, reflection on the issue of taking social media or technology and addressing and beginning to deal with this issue of poverty. With the challenge before us truly the bridge between theology, empathy, and technology, and how might we sustain that given the current infrastructure, collaboratively and together? What were some of the methods used with the breakdowns in communication in the 60s to keep the movement going?
Oh, was that directed to me?
Yeah. I'll mix it up. I won't throw it all at you, Dr. McLean.
The question is?
The question is this, is that it sounds, what was lifted up by Dr. McAllister is the challenges as it relates to social media. The fact that there's initial excitement, but there's not sustainability of it when it comes to actual execution upon the issues.
One of the things that Martin King was able to do, and it took some doing to do it, was to mobilize preachers and the church into being involved. Now, let me go back a little bit because I was there, so I'm not talking about what I read in history books. I remember the Birmingham campaign, and I remember the opposition from the churches and from the pastors, black pastors. It was only after we were able to mobilize the children. Once the children got involved and Huntley and Brinkley could show the water hoses being directed at children and cattle prods being used on children, on young people. It was only after we got the children involved in the movement did we get the preachers and their parents involved in the movement. We've got to find some kind of way that we ignite that kind of excitement, that kind of concern, that kind of involvement in the effort to reach the beloved community. Let me say one other thing. I was at Selma too, and I remember taking 2 busloads of seminary students from, I was in school, Braxton, you remember this. I had come back to do my doctorate at Boston University, and the Selma campaign was going on, so I mobilized seminary students from Harvard Divinity School and Boston University and Episcopal Theological Seminary and all of the other seminaries in the Boston area. We went down to Selma to participate in the voting rights campaign and to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge. One of the things that, and this has not been told, one of the reasons why Selma wasn't any more bloody than it was that we had Roman Catholic sisters, nuns, Josephites, Josephite nuns who were going back and forth between the black community and the white community, getting information, sharing information with us, and warning us over and over again what was being done and planned on the other side. They've never been given credit, as far as I know, for the role that the Josephite sisters played in the movement in Selma, Alabama. My point is we've got to ignite many different kinds of people in the movement. It can't be just a black movement.
Amen.
It has to be all of us involved in the movement. White and black and brown and yellow and red. All of us involved, because all of us are affected by poverty, by the economic situation we're in now. And my heavens, what in the world are we doing about voting rights when you make it difficult? We worked hard, we shed our blood in order to get the right to vote. And then here we are now making it difficult for the people to vote. We need a serious all-out campaign to make it easier, for we know that voteless people surely are hopeless people.
Amen to that. In the work that I do with the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, I began to realize that communication was so essential, and that we could never assume that people understood the role that they could play in helping with whatever the issue was. And there were times I was a little personally intimidated when Joshua was my boss at the time, would send us to the National Baptist Convention or some major gathering to talk to them about the White House agenda, the president's agenda. And there was a feeling that I was speaking to people who already got it, whatever it was. They already understood, and time again, people would listen to our presentations, participate in panels, and the question would be, okay, now that you've explained the issue to us, now that you've brought it into view, how can we help? And so we started realizing that we had to shape our conversation as a way that would empower people. Even if they thought they understood, they hadn't been refreshed on a way to go forward. They didn't know who the new teammates were, or it wasn't intergenerational enough. And so the feeling that no matter how many times we told the story, I started thinking it's kind of like church. So every Sunday morning, or I used to call it bathtub theology, the water is hot for just a little while, and then you got to let some out and put some more hot water in if you want things to keep on doing what they're supposed to do. And so we found that we just had to be willing to tell the story over and over and over and over again in as many settings as we could, involving as diverse a group of persons, as diverse a group of theological understandings as we were able to do. And the people were willing to help if they understood that they were not by themselves. And I cannot overemphasize how important it is to have young voices. And so the President's Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge was something that we got a little pushback on. But we're working with college campuses all across the United States now, talking to hearing from those young adults who are saying, we can do this. We understand how to work together. We're learning from one another. And by the White House being a part of this, you've empowered us to step into service learning in a new way. So I've encouraged in the work to know that there are people who are willing. We just have to make sure we're sharing tools, that we don't get tired. Dr. Haidt used to say, take the letter T out of your dictionary, because that's where you're going to find tired, and you can't afford to get tired. So involving these young adults, these college-age students who have the energy, the heart, they want to help, they connect in different ways, and knowing that we can't stop with one message or one event. We have to keep on equipping people to do like Lou has done. Start your own ministry. Just know that you're doing it around the same themes of helping to lift people out of poverty, helping to empower people to help themselves and others.
And I think there's a great opportunity now that there wasn't in the past. The main body of the church in America was late to abolition. It was late to civil rights. It was late to the Vietnam War.
Yes.
It was absent in these last 2 wars we've been engaged in. Having said that, every segment of the church that we encounter, and you have been speaking about this, Brenda, has discovered the poor again. If you think, for instance, of the megachurch white pastors, many of whom are now on the lead in talking about the poor, but you think about it all through the Christian church, there's a real potential here for the church to get it right this time and not be late to the party. Now the challenge is going to be the church is also getting older. So if we can take Brenda's challenge and figure out how to mobilize the youth, it may be that it's time again for the church to step up a little earlier, because we know
Amen.
in Washington,
Amen.
Wall Street's going to take care of Wall Street. Washington's going to take care of Main Street. The church is going to have to watch out for the mean streets.
Yeah.
And that's the opportunity again.
I think it's key to not just give young people voice, but really to give them leadership and ownership of these movements that we're talking about. Oftentimes we talk about empowering young people and making sure that they have a role, but in order for these movements to really be sustainable, they've got to be at the helm. They've got to be at the forefront. Executive directors of organizations, we've got to take some risks. We've got to allow folks who may do things that we disagree with, or that we would do something radically different than the way that they're doing. We've got to allow them to lead these emerging organizations. One of the groups that I'm a big fan of now is called the Dream Defenders. They are working around the country on voting rights and opposing stand your ground laws and so forth. And it's just a radical group of kids that are mostly under 23 years old, and just and doing their thing. Now, would I do everything the exact way that they're doing it? Probably not, but they have ownership of this movement, and I think that's going to be so key. You know, Dr. King, as Dr. McLean knows, was 26 years old when
I
he
was going
started
to
doing
say,
all this, so.
we were all young then,
That's right,
you
yeah.
know?
Facing opposition
Yeah,
from your
we
elders.
were
Yeah.
all young.
That's right. Yeah.
When we look at poverty and we integrate poverty with this issue of the prison industrial complex, mass incarceration, the pipeline to prison, recidivism, as tough as the issue of facing and ending poverty seems, that seems even tougher. We don't realize how much mass incarceration is integrated in everything that we do. It's integrated in the fabric of our economy. The biggest outsourcer in the country is not overseas, it's in mass incarceration. It's a huge profit center for many of the Fortune 500 companies. And how, what I've heard that's been exciting is, in this discourse, was the affirmation of the integration of generations and the sharing between generations to move the needle as it relates to poverty, not only short term, but to make it sustainable, not a flash in the pan. But how might we deal with something that is such a significant revenue generation for Wall Street? And even it's now moved even into the government in terms of being a significant revenue generator.
Yeah.
How would King address and deal with mass incarceration today in its current state? What would he have to say about it?
You know, it's a huge issue, but it's not so big that it can't be solved. And that's one thing we have to remind ourselves, that all of these issues that Dr. McLean and Ms. Pearl and others were working on, at some point people thought that they were too big to be addressed too, but they put together a plan and then they worked the plan. You know, you had Bayard Rustin and other folks who were the strategists who, you know, saw 5, 6, 7, 8 years out and worked the plan. And I think we can do the same thing on the issue of mass incarceration. In fact, there are things happening even now. We finally reduced the disparity in sentencing between powder cocaine and crack cocaine from 100 to 1 to 10 to 1. And that's, we need to do even more.
And that's an important thing.
That's very important. Attorney General Eric Holder recently pushed some new regulations through that reform sentencing for nonviolent criminals. And now even Republicans are getting involved, and the reason is we've reached a point where prisons used to be profitable, but now they're breaking city and state budgets because they're having to spend so much on these private prisons that they don't have any money in their government budgets anymore. And so we need to take advantage of this moment that we're in, reach out to our elected officials and others and say, we've got to get creative about criminal justice solutions, but get it out of our head that this is a problem that's way too big for anybody to solve, and just put together a plan and work the plan.
And let's think about prisons for a moment, because they're an amazing example of what could happen in the movement. We mentioned the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We might have mentioned the bus boycotts. We might have mentioned other visible, filmable locations that were strategically chosen. When was the last time you saw any news story of a nonviolent protest in numbers outside a prison? These are locations. These are location shots and opportunities for organizing.
And I'll just add, we go upstream and figure out how people got thrown in the prison stream.
Yes.
We'll start focusing on the fact that if children don't know how to read, especially boys, by grade 3, we know that they're on the way to prison. We know the stats of how many young people that happens to. And so focusing on what we do now, but what we do to prevent people from being in that stream that makes it more likely that they'll go to prison than that they'll go to college. We have to think about those early strategies, as well as the prevention and the correction and the rehabilitation after people have become labeled as offenders. And it's good news also that just in the past couple of weeks, Eric Holder and President Obama announced the new guidance, and Secretary Duncan, new guidance for school discipline. So why is that relevant? Because some of our children of color get disciplined and labeled harder and earlier, and then it puts them on the wrong track.
Yes.
So there are steps we can take at all levels of this debate.
I want to call again for the church to be involved. Now, it blows my mind that the Muslims have the most effective prison ministry in this country. Recidivism is almost zero. As Muslims are able to do ministry in prisons, they don't go back. Now, what is it that we are not doing as Christians? I'm a Christian. I salute the Muslims and Jews and anybody else who has an effective ministry. But what is wrong with the church and its ministry? Now, let's be honest. Church folk don't want to talk about prison. Even though every local church that I know of has somebody who has gone to prison. But the church backs away from it. It's a real issue. And then we're not willing to set up programs for jobs and for reintegrating the persons who come out of the prison. When I was a pastor, I used to go to the prison, with my male chorus and all of that, and preach and all that. But the truth is, we didn't have a thoroughgoing program. We were just offering a little service, Dr. Braxton. We weren't really. We need a thoroughgoing program that's all encompassing, that helps to rehabilitate people in prison rather than punish them, rehabilitate them, and then reintegrate them into the society once they're out.
And I'll note that for folks who want to get involved just locally in this issue, the DC government actually has a pretty effective department, CSOSA, CSOSA. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it here, but they do reentry programs. I've been to a few of their graduations where folks who are coming out of incarceration can meet up with local pastors and leaders right after they get out, and you give them a big hug and give them an award, and you say, we're going to walk with you on this journey after you've been released. So check out CSOSA. It's a DC city agency that you can get involved in on this issue locally. Yeah.
Amen. Let me do this. Were you going to make another comment? Let me do this. Because we're moving along in terms of time. And I wanted to at least open it up for a couple of questions from the audience to the panel. Does anyone have questions? You guys are not shy normally. I know most of you. Yes, there's a question in the back.
we wouldn't have had a movement if we hadn't had song. We reinterpreted and edited the Negro spirituals and made them civil rights songs. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Now that didn't come out of the civil rights movement. That came out of the church. We just redid it. We never marched ever without first going to church. Prayer and song. Now, we've got to update, and I hear your question, we've got to update the music because the music of one age may not serve totally for another age. Now, I can't rap.
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can, Dr. McClain.
Yes, you can.
Well, I can rap the way we rapped when I was rapping. You know, I helped to do a follow-up to, I did Songs of Zion many years ago, and we did a follow-up, Zion Still Sings is the title of the sequel. And we brought some young folk in to try to help us. They said, well, you can't write this down. You can't. They showed us it can be done. And let me, while I'm talking about it, let me commend this wonderful group who sang here this morning.
Yeah.
If I had a church, I'd borrow that bass that's in that group.
You know, I can't help but think, the question about songs, about 4 floors above where we're sitting right now, a woman sat at a window, looked across the Potomac to the soldiers encamped on what is now Arlington Cemetery, and wrote, "My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." The Battle Hymn of the Republic. We sit here 50 years after the declaration of the war on poverty. I can't help but think that everybody marches to music, and that's the answer.
And I think we've got to figure out a way to have our music combine both the prophetic but also the popular too, because if it's not popular, nobody's going to listen to it,
Yes.
right? But there's not a whole lot of music that's out there right now that's prophetic, and so it's really understanding the market, understanding how to create songs that young people want to listen to, but then weaving in notes of prophecy into those songs.
While we're on music, let me just say this, because this is on my chest. We need to get away from all these 7-11 songs. seven words repeated 11 times. We got to put some content into the music, some prophetic, social prophetic content into the music, so that it says something.
That's a good
And
rap.
I love gospel songs. I did Songs of Zion in order to make it possible for the church to endorse and sing gospel songs. But we need some songs that have some social message in them, some prophetic word in them, and not just those 7-11 songs.
Amen.
And I just say, not one size fits all, not one song fits all.
Amen.
So just make room for whatever's going to touch
Amen.
the groups we're trying to touch.
We have time for two more questions. Yes.
Would it be appropriate to talk about how Restore Together ties this together?
Absolutely.
And what Restore Together is?
Yes. Eva is a board member, amen. Keeping me on task. But Restore Together, I mean, many of the things that were talked about, from the integration from generation to generation, from dealing with prisoners from cradle all the way through cradle to full and abundant life. Restore Together actually moves from addressing and dealing with the systemic challenges and collaborating and pulling together every single age group, those that are involved in technology and those that are not involved in technology, all the way through integration to 500,000 help organizations around the country, all the way through allowing counseling resources for those directly in need of that, and then dealing with the collaboration of resources from products to services to monetary donations, things that you would never imagine that are needed, but often are needed when you're dealing with the full ecosystem of need of those individuals that are in crisis. And so many of the things that we've talked about is exactly why God had developed Restore Together, to deal with pulling us all together, to deal with total restoration of the individual and community. Amen?
And it's restoredtogether.com.
It's restoredtogether.com or .org or .net.
Say it again.
It is restoredtogether.com, restoredtogether.org, or restoredtogether.net, but use the first two. You cannot miss. It's in English and in Spanish. It will soon be in Korean and French, and then other dialects around the world. So it is a global ministry to end poverty and oppression. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. Yeah, one other question.
It's more like a reflection about what was said about students being in the movement and remembering how in 1976, in South Africa when I was young, it was the students, who led it. And then coming to this country in colleges, it was students, playing this one movie, 6 Days in Soweto, that mobilized students. And it's Ben Jallis as a younger president of the NAACP that spoke to the prison industrial complex and how we needed to let the states let go the
Death penalty?
execution. So there have been states, that have done that because a young man in Ben Jallis, the vigor and the way he spoke so that he was understood, in that language of youth. So things happen. But another thing is that the United States has so much tentacles now in thinking about using media. Martin Luther King was amazing. Dr. Martin Luther King was amazing because we knew him when we didn't know that anybody cared. So it's so critical, therefore, to understand globally what you do here has an amazing impact on those people who are poor, dispossessed in other places.
Amen. The largest membership on Restore Together is not here. It's in Malawi. We'll talk more about Restore Together later on. But join me in just thanking our panel. They've done a wonderful job in this. Just wonderful. And Reverend Dubois was nice enough to sign a copy of his new book for all the panelists. Amen. And so we truly appreciate that gift. Yes, I'll pass it as we go along. Let us move on with the program. Amen.